start with my hand.
The House Committee on Economic Development and Small Business will come to order. Mr. Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Chair Hoskins. Here. Representatives Grant.
Here.
Whitsett. Neely.
Here.
Liberati.
Here.
Copia.
Here.
Farhat.
Here.
Miller.
Here.
Tisdale.
Here.
Van Workum.
Here.
Martin.
Here.
Roth.
Here.
St. Germain.
Here.
Chair, you have 12 members present in the quorum.
All right, thank you. And thank everyone for being here. A few bills up on the agenda today. We're going to start with Senate Bill 417, sponsored by Senator Singh. It's like Senator Singh could come up, and he looks like he's going to be joined by Clarence Stone from MISHDA. And Mr. Stefanko? Stefanko, all right. And Michael Stefanko, to General Counsel from, and I hope I don't mess up the.
It's Janasco Development Company.
Yeah, I would have messed that up. Janasco Development. I thank you all for being here, and whenever you're ready.
Great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me to testify this morning in support of Senate Bill 1417, which will make Michigan more competitive in the housing development market. I don't have to tell this group, because you've looked at the housing issue on a number of different occasions, that housing is, and affordable housing is one of the key issues that every one of our communities is dealing with throughout the entire state. This is a set of minor changes to existing allowances within MISHDA that will, I think, help us deal with different sets of housing needs, whether it's for our seniors or whether it's for redevelopment. Currently, right now, MISHDA's authorizing statute permits it to participate in conduit, or what's called oftentimes pass-through financing, in which bonds are issued to finance the development on a limited obligation based on the authority. In the end, what these bonds do, they're not secured by MISHDA's capital reserve, and they're not bonds that are backed by the obligation of the state of Michigan. However, these bonds are secured by the revenues of the borrower, the real and personal property that's being financed. And this form of credit enhancement is a tool that MISHDA has been using, and what that does is it really helps the developer, as they're starting a project, be able to ramp up much more quickly. So this insulates the state from any risk, but it also helps the developer be able to make significant progress on their projects. After MISHDA issues the bonds, these can be up to 36 months. For a project, the developer often will refinance that either through the Federal Housing Administration or other financing source. These short-term obligations are used for that initial acquisition, construction, or rehabilitation, as I mentioned earlier. MISHDA's been expanding the use of this over the last few years, and I'm sure Clarence will talk a little bit more about that. What this bill does specifically is it allows this program to expand to include independent living establishments, congregate care, or assisted living units for people over 55 or older. The bill will also allow MISHDA to establish higher income limits for specified multifamily housing projects and increase that from $25 million to $100 million, the maximum outstanding loan commitment for borrowers. And it also is seeking to increase the flexibility in the program to allow projects to qualify to use the funds for rehabilitation of existing housing units. These changes will bring that section law in line with federal requirements. And then in the end, this is just another tool that we want to provide to our local developers to help us with the housing crisis that we're in. I'm not suggesting that this is the be-all and end-all, but I do think it's an important tool. So thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak, and we'll ask Clarence to go next, and then Michael will follow.
One thing I want to note about the bill is that it allows for what's called private placements, and it would allow for private placements without something called credit enhancement. Currently under the bill, whenever you get a pass-through loan, you have to have what's called credit enhancement, which is a means of ensuring that the bonds are going to be paid off. With the private placement addition, the key is that the bonds, or the assumption is that the bonds would be purchased by a qualified institutional investor, and you don't have that need to have the credit enhancement requirement. So you would have one of two options if you're a borrower. You could either go the credit enhancement route, or you could go the private placement route. And most states, and we checked with a number of our state housing peers, they allow for private placements. So this would make or enable MSHDA to be in line with what is the current practice nationally when it comes to conduit financing. So that's a major change. The other major change is increasing the number of, or the amount of outstanding commitments from 50 million, if it's in an eligible distressed area, to 100 million, regardless of the area that it's in. That will enable MSHDA to close on more deals. We've had to, let's say, hold off on, taking deals to our board for commitment and authorization because that ceiling has been hit. And so that would be a major change as well. So those are two changes that I just wanted to highlight that I think would lead to more housing production through this program.
Yes, so from the development community's perspective, we're in lockstep with MSHDA as far as the need for this amendment. I think Clarence did a good job of highlighting some of the technical components of it. I think what's important about this is this amendment will open up a new method of financing that is accepted around the country in the state of Michigan, and allow the development community to potentially get deals done that otherwise couldn't, specifically in the new construction context, which, while the rehabbing and maintaining the existing affordable housing stock is important, if we're going to address the need of the state, we need more tools like this so we can actually get new units online to really address the need. I think that's one of the most important parts about this change from the development community's perspective.
All right, thank you so much for your testimony. Do we have questions from members of the committee? Oh, Representative Tisdale. Oh.
Don't know my own strength. Thank you, Chair Hoskins. Just one quick question regarding security, and you talked about secured by borrower revenues. This could be Senator Singh or anyone that's on the panel. And you're doubling the caps on some of these, but so a borrower could get up to 100% of the total development cost, but not over the cap. But at the same time, MSHDA is replacing its normal underwriting and feasibility review with now a process that will ensure the loan is reasonably secure. What kind of risk does that present to the state?
Yeah, the theory behind the pass-through program is that the credit enhancement feature replaces the underwriting of the loan. That's the theory. If you look back at when the pass-through program was created, you talk to the people like bond counsel that were involved with the creation of the pass-through program. The theory is that when you issue the bonds, the key is that the credit enhancement would ensure that those bonds are paid off. Okay, and in theory, that replaces the traditional underwriting process that we go through if it's a general obligation development. And the key for this bill is that not only are we offering the credit enhancement option, that remains, but we are also allowing a private placement option so that qualified, sophisticated institutional investors can buy our bonds. And the theory behind that is that we want to make sure that if a mom and pop or an individual buys our bonds, that those bonds are going to be paid off because the full faith and credit of the authority is not backing those bonds. That's why we have that hard credit enhancement requirement. But you don't need that protection for a qualified institutional investor that has a high credit rating and has the sophistication to evaluate the risk. So we're comfortable with adding that private placement option in addition to the credit enhancement requirement.
So I would just reiterate, because of that piece, you no longer have the need to have the state of Michigan on the hook for this, or MSHDA on the hook for this. It's now between those institutional investors and the developer themselves. That's what I think is really unique about
Right.
this, is that you're now providing this tool for the development community, but it's not at risk for state dollars and resources.
So in theory, that provides more comfort for the state.
Well, the pass-through program currently provides comfort because of that credit enhancement requirement. That eliminates risk to the state or to the authority, because you're ensuring that those bonds are going to be paid off. And so, for example, when we do a closing, let's say with Janasco, for example, you'll have cash from a loan that's used as a credit enhancement, or you'll have something called a standby enhancement agreement that's issued by an institution like Freddie Mac that will ensure that the bonds are paid. So you want to make sure those bonds are going to be paid. The addition of what this bill does is it adds, again, that private placement option so that a qualified, sophisticated institutional investor can buy the bonds. You don't need those same protections for that institutional investor. You don't have to worry about, if those bonds are purchased by an institutional investor, you don't have to worry about those, you don't have the same concerns that you would have, let's say, with an individual, such as, let's say, my mother buying the bonds and not realizing the risk that she's taking.
Yeah. And for a borrower that is borrowing up to 100% of the project cost, possibly.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like I'm glazing over like a punchki here. So, well, thank you very much.
Any other Representative Kofia?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, and thank you, gentlemen, for being here and presenting on this bill. I was trying to understand a little better a piece of the bill, and you talked about it a little bit, Senator, in your testimony, decreasing from 30% to 15% the minimum percent of total costs that must be spent on rehabilitation for a project to qualify as rehabilitation. What was help me understand the thinking behind dropping that from 30% of total costs to 15 in order for it to qualify as a rehab housing project?
When we were doing, I can take that if that's okay. When we were drafting the bill, this was a recommendation so that the state's requirements would be in line with federal requirements. If you look at federal requirements, that's the percentage. But, no, percent, yes, 15%. So by having 30%, you have a higher hurdle. And the theory was that it should really be in line with federal requirements.
Thank you.
Any other committee members have questions? All right. Well, thank you so much for your testimony today. I'm going to read in a couple of cards. We have not wishing to speak in support of the bill, Mark Garsha from MISHDA, and not wishing to speak in support of the bill, Michelle Brandt from the Michigan Realtors. All right. Next, we will have testimony on House Bills 5413, 14, and 15, the Higher Michigan package. A bicameral, bipartisan package that we've been working on. As we've been doing a lot of work in this committee, we've been doing, I think, a lot of great work and really identifying the things that we need to make Michigan a top 10 state. And one of the things that we certainly have been looking at is targeted incentives to make sure we're doing everything we can to attract and retain good jobs and talent here. I think Higher Michigan is one of those tools that will be very helpful in that endeavor. I'm going to have the bill sponsors come up and testify. So Senator Singh has the Senate version of the Higher Michigan package, and I'll have Representative gave you all a little promotion there. Representative Filler and Martis come up as well to testify on this package.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Pleased to be here with Representatives Martis and Filler to talk about our conversation we've been having in regards to the Higher Michigan legislation. I know there'll be additional testimony from the business community, from MEDC and others, to provide a little bit more technical detail on this. I'm going to just talk about the historical nature of the payroll tax incentive here in the state and sort of the premise behind this. I'll let the two gentlemen speak more specifically to the bills that are in front of the chamber here. The Senate has similar bills but different numbers, and I know that'll be an ongoing conversation between the two chambers to find the right numbers as we try to land the plane on this type of incentive. Our office has been working on this along with Senator Kavanaugh in the Senate for almost close to about 8 months or so. And one of the reasons why I wanted to work on this bill is that in 2017, I worked at that point in time with Governor Snyder and the legislature, as I was the Democratic leader, to create the tax capture bill that was oftentimes called Good Jobs. The Good Jobs bill created an opportunity for us as a state to provide a payroll tax incentive where a business had to come in, show the MEDC that it was bringing new jobs to the area, and then from there, if they were granted this incentive, they would then receive a credit on their payroll taxes. They wouldn't be paying the payroll taxes on those new individuals. And what I thought was unique and special about this, especially when you take a look at incentive programs, is that oftentimes older incentives that we had, we would give money up front to a company. And then that company would take those dollars. And if they didn't get the jobs that you wanted, you'd have to claw back those resources. What happens here is in a payroll tax incentive is that the company makes the case that this is what they're going to do. Then once those jobs are actually created, it allows MEDC, Treasury, and others to go in and verify that those jobs have actually been created at the levels of annual salary that was suggested in their plan, and it's only then that they begin to see that incentive. And so instead of the older model of giving money up front and then clawing back, you only get the incentive once you hit the benchmarks that you have. And so that bipartisan package helped bring in new jobs here in Michigan. Companies such as Ford, Stellantis, Acusure, Pfizer, and others utilized that during that period of time. There was a sunset on that set of bills, and unfortunately the legislature prior to this wasn't able to find common ground on reestablishing that and continuing that. And so that has expired. And that's one of the reasons why we are taking a look at this. You'll hear from the business community and others about the states around us that provide the same incentive to their businesses. And so as we are competing sort of on that market here in the country to bring jobs and grow jobs, we are looking at this as a tool to make sure that we're competitive with multiple states. I know there's been a lot of conversation about other programs that we have here. I know people sometimes talk about SOAR and some of those other programs. This is not that. This is really geared towards those smaller companies, somewhere around 50 employees, 250 employees and so forth. Those other programs that I think have to take a lot of time and conversation are for these larger manufacturing. This program is really geared towards trying to bring more higher knowledge-based economy jobs here. I think many of you probably saw a recent report that was done by Michigan's Future that really talked about how Michigan has not got its fair share of those knowledge workers and those knowledge jobs here in the state as you compare ourselves to states around the area. And so this is really geared towards those higher wages. And that's part of the conversation that I know this chamber will have, and as we negotiate between both chambers, if this proceeds, that we will try to find the right landing place. But this, again, is a tool that is not there for that smaller business sector. Obviously, the larger manufacturing tools that are there, there are tools that are really geared for micro business and other companies, but this is sort of a tool in that middle that we're trying to create. So I'm going to stop there, obviously allow my colleagues to specifically talk about the bill package that's in front of you, and then I know we'll have others that will be here to testify as well. So.
Thank you to Senator Singh and Senator Kavanaugh for their leadership on the Senate side, and then in the House, Chair Hoskins, Representative Filler, and myself have been working on this. Just a couple of highlights that I think are really important to remember with this legislation, especially comparing it to its previous iteration as Good Jobs, is the extension of the sunset on this. A lot of the business folks that we've talked about being in support of this legislation, that would benefit from this legislation, really hit home that if you're thinking of investing here in Michigan, one of the most important things for a business is consistency. They need to make sure that a lot of our tax policies, a lot of the programs that we're pushing at the state level are not going to be taken away. They're not going to be added. These business folks really need a lot of consistency. With Good Jobs in its previous form, because it had such a short sunset, we've almost been talking about the benefits of Good Jobs longer than Good Jobs was actually in effect. And so extending this, making sure that companies that want to reinvest here in Michigan know that for the next few years they will be able to benefit from this is a huge incentive for them. Another important point is the tax capture component of this. A lot of folks, especially on my side of the aisle, have been worried about making sure that we have enough funds in the budget to fund the programs that we think really benefit communities like ours. But with the specific structure of this, we're not giving money away because these tax dollars are never actually coming in to be a part of our state government's revenue. And so because these dollars are not coming in, it's not necessarily a hit to the budget in comparison to other programs that we've supported in the past. So we're able to create these jobs, we're able to help these businesses, but we're not necessarily taking a hit to our state budget, which is something that a lot of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle have expressed concerns about. We're addressing that in this legislation. And the last point, which Senator Singh really hit home on, is this is really targeted at high-paying jobs. And the multiplier impact of this is tremendous. We're looking at a relatively small number of jobs, but because these have such high salaries, because these folks will be making a lot of money, they're going to be paying more taxes that will support our state's revenue, but also their impact in their local communities is going to be a tremendous impact. So from our analysis of Good Jobs, there were a lot of things that worked well. We want to make sure that we build upon those successes. Good Jobs was done in a bipartisan manner a few years ago. We're continuing that legacy with Higher Jobs. A lot of folks said that Gooder Jobs would not be a good title for that, so that's why we're switching it to Higher. But with Higher, we're really building on the success of the previous program, addressing some of the current concerns that folks might have had in the past. And while it's still a work in progress, I think we're getting to a really good position to deliver a huge bipartisan win for the state of Michigan.
Thanks, Rep. So I guess I would compare this to maybe like it's like the Coles Cash of economic development programs, which is if you invest in Michigan, you create jobs in Michigan, yes, well, great. Here's your payroll tax credited back to you. And so that's why I kind of got on board, because it's not this hit from the general fund. It's not this no accountability. Here's $100 million. We'll see what happens. Essentially, if no jobs are created, no incentive is rewarded. Some other things I want to mention, it does ask for local government support for some of these jobs, which I love hearing. It's good for out-of-state businesses and Michigan businesses, so this isn't just an attraction tool. It's a cultivating tool, which I like a lot also. And it doesn't focus, we've talked so much about manufacturing. We love it, right? Michigan's got a great history of manufacturing. But we're talking about agriculture, technology, energy, tourism. This could really attract a lot of different varied jobs. So that's how I got on board. And so I ask for your support, and thanks for Representative and Senator for laying out some of the details. Thanks, Chair.
All right, thank you. Are there any questions from committee members? And I also will say too, Senator Singh pointed it out, we will have testimony from MEDC, as well as we have a presentation from business leaders of Michigan. So if there are technical questions that you might have, they may be good people to bring those up. But if there are any questions for the bill sponsors, I'll start with Representative Farhat.
I prefer Myers perks over Coles Cash, but this handout's really helpful here, and I think this is a smart way for us to remain competitive in the national kind of labor market, right? You're seeing a huge demand for labor, and we're in a competition to attract some. I think this is a smart way to go about it. But two questions, not so much technical, more so maybe stylistic. When you say local support, what is the threshold there to identify if there is local support? Right? Is it? That's the first question. What does that threshold look like?
So they're going to take a quick look at how it's written here. Our language is a little different in both pieces. I think here we anticipate a lot of our local economic development institutions to be working sort of side by side with the state of Michigan. We don't want to force that conversation if it's not necessary, but we do believe that our local economic development groups are going to be the ones selling this program, working alongside with the business, and that helps provide some of that local connection.
Yeah. And then the second one is, Ohio doesn't do many things right, if anything. But I noticed that they have it to be, their jobs threshold is 10 jobs. And ours is 50, 250 in the new one. I know you mentioned that there's a special focus for like micro enterprises, which I think is great, and other legislations. In this threshold at 50, 250, has there been any consideration at making it a lower threshold at all?
There have been discussion, I think you'll hear from some of the people that will testify today about potentially lowering that number to 25. We still want to be able to see sort of a sizable sort of growth here. And that's why we wanted to put some minimums and put them a little bit higher than what perhaps are in other states, but there has been a conversation. I know we're still in negotiations with our Republican colleagues, and the number of 25 is floating around there as well. But so, yeah, there has been some consideration about taking that 50 number down to 25.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that, Senator. And this is really exciting to be before us today, so thank you.
Representative Roth.
I'm first, thank you. A little concerned, just a little bit about the language with average pay over median pay. Is that going to really reduce the number of availability to some of these companies? Now, hopefully the companies will respond, but that's just one area that I saw that I was a little bit concerned with.
Yeah, and I'm sure the other people who will testify will, talk about whether median or average. We had that conversation. I think our concern is sometimes, especially you get into certain parts of the state where you have CEO salaries that are very large. When you just average those in, it kind of skews the actual range for people. And so the thought process was looking at the median income for a region. We didn't want to we wanted to provide some differences because we know the North is different than Southeast Michigan, then it's different than Mid-Michigan where Representative Filler and I are from. And so we wanted to use those prosperity zones and regions median income. So you're not going to you will have a different number in Northern Michigan than you do in Southeast Michigan, but we didn't want to just use average because our concern was that you could have at that point in time really large CEO salaries and others that would skew some of those numbers.
Thank you.
Representative Martin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question goes to, Representative Filler said we wouldn't see a loss to the state if the jobs weren't created. My question goes to, we don't operate in a vacuum. So we have this Grow Michigan. We talk about manufacturing. We're talking about high tech. But we're also talking about reliable and affordable energy. If we don't have affordable energy and it's not reliable, high tech's not going to come here. If we don't have good roads, if we don't, put this infrastructure in place for other things, I'm trying to focus on live, work, and retire in Michigan. I want to retain those things. But just doing a job incentive for payroll, we got to make sure that other things in place so those companies want to come here and want to stay here. So whether it's the cost of energy, the cost of whatever we do to produce something, I just want to make sure that it's a whole package, and I want to look at that. And if there's no loss because there's no jobs gained, then this might be something that just we won't be able to measure. And I'm kind of concerned that we'd never know how valuable this could be because there'll be nothing to measure.
I think we are taking a much more comprehensive approach to economic development than we have in years past, and I would point to the last time I was in front of this committee talking about the research and development tax credit, the R&D tax credit, which almost everyone on this committee ended up supporting on the floor. Thank you for that. Was something similar to this, where we were the only state in the Midwest or in our region that did not have a research and development tax credit. That's very similar to having this sort of payroll tax credit. So we're trying to compete regionally, and that's with addressing a lot of the things that we don't currently have. So I think when you look at economic development of research and development tax credit, payroll tax credit, Renaissance zones, some of the other programs that we're working on. Number one, they've been done in a bipartisan manner, which is really important, so that no matter who's in charge of the House or Senate or the governorship going forward, we can point to this as a bipartisan win. It's something that we can offer consistency to businesses, and we're not just focusing on one individual program. So my hope is that that's going to address a little bit of those concerns.
Right, I have a follow-up on that. So my concern, like I said, is we need to attract businesses here and not just the pay of the person. So if we have stricter than federal regulations that we give to Eagle is going to be getting more free hand in promulgating their rules without a lot of filters and so forth. If we don't encourage businesses to come here, it won't matter what we pay somebody. So I don't know if we'll have something to measure. That's my concern.
All right, thank you. Representative Kofia.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, gentlemen, for bringing your bill package in front of us today. So I'm just curious if you could speak, what does higher paying jobs mean under this bill? What are good paying jobs? And, you know, different regions. I'm from Northern Michigan. We got mostly small and medium sized business. I hear a lot from our constituents up north. We want good paying jobs, but what are we talking about here? What's the range? Do you have numbers? And a piggyback on that is, how long would the businesses be required to offer? I've heard some stories of incentives that come and they're jobs for a while. I have family members who got those jobs, and then after the incentive ran out, they got cut loose. So just trying to think about it from a Northern Michigan perspective.
We wrote in, 250 plus new jobs at 125% of the regional median wage. That's the House bill, I believe. And then 25 plus new jobs at 150% of the regional median wage. And so that's how we wrote the bill right now. I can show that to you in the bill if you'd like me to.
Yeah, if you could send those numbers along to our committee, that would be helpful. Thank you.
And I know MEDC has a chart, and others have charts that would show sort of in the 10 prosperity regions, you know, what the median is and what this would do. I do want to say that the Senate does have some different numbers. I think right, it was at 50 and above was at 175, and then 250 and above was 150. As we've been having some conversations with our colleagues in more rural areas, there was a discussion about if you're in a smaller county, potentially having a lower percentage. That 175 was probably too high. And so I think that'll be part of the ongoing conversation for all of us. I don't think any one of us are wed to numbers fully. I think we're still getting some, feedback from the business community and others on what those final numbers would look like.
Thank you, Senator. And to the second half of my question about any sort of assurances that there isn't this short-term, we're going to do some hires to take advantage of this incentive, and then within a few years, if the incentive runs out, can you talk a little bit about that? Are these long-term, good-paying jobs?
That goes to, and it's something that I couldn't agree with more, it's the extension of the sunset, which we're looking at. There's also mentions the permanent full-time job. Yeah, making sure we're extending the sunset so that it's not, this benefit helping folks for 1 to 2 years, and then once it runs out, those businesses cutting those folks out. We're really looking at making sure that not just from extending the sunset, but the types of jobs we're bringing in, that they will have a permanent base in those communities. And it goes back to that consistency. I guess if I would reword what I said previously about the consistency being really important for the businesses, it's even more important for the folks that work at those businesses.
And Representative, I think MEDC will be here specifically, and I think they will be the best to answer how they look at permanent employment, how they ensure that this program, that those employees continue to be there beyond the time period of the program itself. And so I think they'll be here to answer some of those more technical questions on how they look and ensure that that stuff is done correctly.
All right. Representative Van Workum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, members, for your testimony, and certainly Representative Filler giving us a little insight on Coles Cash. But maybe I can use that metaphor here. But with that, there's kind of a simple, you're kind of making this seem very simple of how this is going to be operated. But as I look through this and as committee members have additional questions about this, it's a little bit more complex than that of I buy something at a certain value, I get that some money back in a rebate or cash back, or I create this many jobs, I get this much benefit. When you look through this, we're talking about the amount of new jobs, when they're added, the median regional wage, how long they're hired. There's a lot of different complexity, and Representative Martis mentioned the R&D tax credit. One of the things we wanted to do was simplify that, right? That this became more of a treasury type decision, that when you did your federal tax rate, you got the R&D. This one, again, seems a lot of discretion with the MSF, which is appointed by the governor, and a couple other appointments and made up of the governor's cabinet. And then you have all these different qualifiers, all these different check-offs to determine whether a company is going to receive this benefit and when they're going to receive that benefit. So I guess I'm a little bit interested in what that dynamic is. Where is the decision-making of the MSF? Where is the decision-making of the Treasury? Who is the backstop to make sure that they are receiving the benefit that they deserve or not receiving the benefit that they think they deserve? Where's that dynamic? How's that playing out? Let alone the business themselves and their CPA of determining, I mean, is it a CPA decision? Is it Treasury? Give me a little bit more background on, or what you may envision as the details and the dynamics that is going to exist.
Sure. And maybe we'll let the folks who are going to or would like to administer this speak more to it. But I think putting some complexities in there is good, because we're kind of trying to do better than the old, here's $100 million, we'll see what happens. And so putting guardrails around them payroll tax back. And so just trying to give some guidance, if this becomes law, to whoever administers exactly how that works. And I think writing in median and job creation numbers is important, because it gives a goal and a clear sense of how this is going to actually operate. So I'm okay with some of the complexities. I'd rather have some accountability and complexities than just blank checks. So I guess that's the way I see it. But yeah, I'm not MSF and I'm not MEDC, and so I would be interested in how they actually work on these. You probably know more about how they actually work at them at the granular level when they receive the application for the tax credit.
Maybe I'll ask the question of a next guest as well.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, the Senator Singh's office, I will compliment your staff. They are on it. They already sent me over the answer to the question that I had.
Chris Young is
about-
the best. This is true.
But for example, it looks like Rep. Andrews' district, we're talking jobs at $17.97 an hour. My region, Rep. Roth's region, $24.61. Alpena area, $22.37. That's sort of, it sounds like this is the graph they sent with some of the range of what are considered good paying jobs for the region. So just to share that out, because they got it to me already. Thank you.
All right, thank you. And thank you to Senator Singh's staff there. All right, looks like there's no more questions for these people testifying. So with that being said, thank you, gentlemen, for your testimony. I am going to actually bring up MEDC, Mr. Quentin Messer, and I think Josh Hunt, as we had a lot of questions that revolved around some of the how we are going to be applying this program, and so maybe you can shed a light on that and some other technical questions that came up as well.
Good morning, and thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and to the members of this committee. Thank you for your continued public service, and obviously to the senator and the two representatives who are presenting these bills in a bipartisan fashion. Very grateful. I know that there is a time limit, so I will talk about maybe the first couple of slides, and then Josh Hunt, who is MEDC's Chief Projects Officer, can talk about specific projects in the pipeline. But I want to maybe make sure that I ground the conversation to a broader conversation, which is the legislature, in a bipartisan fashion, along with the governor, announced a Make It in Michigan economic development strategy last June, focused on peoples, places, and projects. You heard separate bill that was also sponsored by Senator Singh on places with affordable housing. We obviously can talk about people in a subsequent time, but really what we're talking about today are projects. How do we make sure that we have an environment not only for Michigan-based businesses to expand here because they know that they have options, but also to attract new ones. So I really want to focus on that projects element of the leg of that three-legged stool of people, places, and projects. So in response to some previous questions, what are we really trying to accomplish? Currently, the MEDC, the state of Michigan, has two economic development tools to secure business expansions of existing Michigan businesses and to attract and retain new businesses. And that's the Michigan Business Development Program and the Closing Fund, formerly known as SOAR. As with anything, there are limitations, and we realize, and as was noted by the bill sponsors, that they are not necessarily sufficient to attract the full universe of businesses that we're seeking, and more importantly, to make sure that we have a tool that allows businesses across a number of different industries, ranging from agribusiness to tourism, hospitality, to others, to take advantage of the fact when they create jobs. These, which you have before you, is really just a sample. We understand that we have to have and are committed to creating jobs across every educational attainment level, from people who finish high school to people who finish certification programs, associate degrees, four-year degrees, and PhDs and postdoctorates. This tool is a common sense approach that allows us to do that. It allows us to win more knowledge sector jobs that are not capital intensive. A lot of our tools are predisposed to be focused upon sectors that are capital intensive, that require building a factory, building something, where this tool will allow companies who are creating jobs, but not necessarily having to invest in physical infrastructure. The life sciences and medical device industry is one such example. Professional and corporate services, from fintech to insurance tech, engineering, design, and development. This tool, and a common sense approach, allows us to make sure that we can compete for those jobs that are very knowledge intensive, whereas they don't necessarily require a lot of physical capital. For example, they could go into any of your districts into a space that needs to be leased, and we don't want to walk away from those opportunities. So what we decided to do was to look into our pipeline. We're going to compete independent of what happens. We obviously will hope that you will agree to create these tools, but we're going to compete using what we have currently. But here are just some projects that will be eligible for the Higher Michigan program. And we want to give you a sense of the diversity across sectors. We have an EV engineering and design company that will be in Southeast Michigan, that's looking at Southeast Michigan. A European company that's an automotive components, a major Southeast manufacturing company. But the more important thing is to look at the wage levels, ranging from $40 an hour to $64 an hour. And more importantly, you can see the incentive totals potentially at the end of the year. But I don't want to lose sight or bury the lead. This is performance reimbursable. Before a dollar goes out, the jobs will be here. And the offset is really on the payroll taxes. So what we're trying to do is to make sure that we, as duty-bound and as anticipated under the Make It in Michigan economic development strategy, have projects across the broadest set of not only industries, but functional areas, and allow us to have jobs that will be able and commensurate that are regionally relevant. We understand that certain regions aren't going to be able to create thousands of jobs from a single project, but 10 to 15 jobs from someone that maybe moved from somewhere else but is creating a software development company could be incredibly beneficial, whether it's in Escanaba, Alpena, or Flint, or wherever it might be. So with that, there were some questions about compliance. May not have the time here to address those, but subsequently or offline, I'm happy to do so. But with that, I'll turn it over to Josh Hunt to discuss further some of the technicalities and things in the pipeline.
Yeah, thank you, Quentin. Thank you, Chair, for the opportunity to be here today. And just to build off of what Quentin was talking about there, is that this program will allow us to support new companies in the state and companies that are growing in the state in industries like clean energy, mobility, professional services, and others. And that this program is a competitive game changer to allow us to continue to be successful in growing these companies and meet them where they are, along with programs like the Michigan Business Development Program and the Critical Industry Program, formerly known as SOAR, under the Make It in Michigan Fund. This program will allow us to support those smaller job growth opportunities under the Michigan Business Development Program, these middle-sized projects and companies within the Higher Michigan Program, and then ultimately support under the Critical Industry Program as well. And on the next slide, I'll outline how this program really effectively works, coupled with those other tools and overall for the state of Michigan. And I will reiterate that this is not a request for any new funding. The financial support from this program comes from the tax capture withholding from the creation of the new jobs directly supported by the project. This means that there is no general fund spending impact to the state. Higher Michigan will be instrumental in securing these growth projects, and the new tax revenue they generate in Michigan instead of in other states. Without Higher Michigan, the general fund also would not receive any additional tax capture, because this is only related to new jobs that are being created directly by the companies, and not only new jobs, but new full-time permanent jobs. To talk a little bit more about getting into the question about how the technical aspect of how this works, after a company receives the incentive and ultimately enters into an agreement and creates the jobs, only then will they apply for reimbursement for the employment taxes once they have fully ramped up their job creation, typically over a 3 to 5 year period. Throughout the term of their contract, estimated to be typically 5 to 10 years, is when they would receive the incentive. All other taxes paid, including business taxes, property taxes, and sales and use taxes, will continue to be a benefit to the state to support the general fund. This program also has built-in enforcement where the company only receives reimbursement for actual employment taxes being paid, and they will go through a verification process that the jobs have been created, paid, and maintained. If there are no wages paid or no employment taxes paid, then there are no dollars where the company could be reimbursed from. And the bottom line is if the company does not create and maintain the number of required jobs and pay the wages that are required, there will be no funding for the company under this program. This program gives Michigan an opportunity to add a missing piece to the puzzle of the economic development toolkit that's focused on adding high-paying jobs in Michigan as we focus on people, places, and projects for a sustainable tool to be part of helping drive the sustainable economy going forward. And so with that, I want to thank you again, Mr. Chair, and I can turn it over to Mr. Messer, or back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thanks, Josh, and I'll turn it over to the chair, and if there's time or if it be the prerogative, we can maybe answer any questions.
Sure. Representative Tisdale.
Thank you, Chair Hoskins. Real quickly, and Chair Hoskins started off with comments that, making Michigan a top 10 state. This would be for Director Messer or Mr. Hunt. Senator Singh talked about competing with multiple other states. I want to kind of piggyback on what Rep. Martin has been asking. Michigan's corporate income tax is 46% higher than the average of the top 10 population inflow states. Our electricity costs are 35% higher than the electricity costs in the top 10 population inflow states. This is basically a 4.25% discount on incremental labor that could be up to 4.5%. It could be up to 50%. It could be for up to 5 years to up to 10 years. There's all those different variables in it. Really, how much of an impact with those structural disadvantages that we have in corporate income taxes and energy costs is this really going to have?
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I would say with all due respect, I think that we should probably, make sure that we can get alignment on the fact base. I think if you look at Michigan's effective tax rate, effective across all tax categories, we have among the lowest in America, among the 12, among the lowest in the top 12 across all tax categories. So I think alignment on the fact base. I think the second question is about energy costs. I think with the work of our PSC, with our utilities, both publicly traded as well as those regionally, I think that folks are working on lowering energy costs. I think one of the parts about the Make It in Michigan economic development strategy is that we're attracting projects that are focused on energy storage, that are allowing us to be competitive and allowing more renewable, clean energy. But to the specifics of the Hire Michigan, what this represents is feedback from the marketplace. Others who will testify will talk about the competitive pressures that either their members, if they are from an association, or we can talk about actual projects that we're competing with against not only U.S. states, but also Canadian provinces. This would be a significant, important step forward that more importantly, and again, let's not lose or bury the lead, doesn't imply anything goes out the door until a job is created. So I think that what this will do, and we can go back and show projects that are very real projects, that this would be a tangible shifter regardless of whether or not we will ever get alignment on the fact base.
Yeah, the overall tax tax burden, we're ranked at 14th. Of course, our property taxes are low because our average house sale is low or value is low. But I was referring specifically to the corporate income taxes and again the cost of energy in the state. But thank you very much.
All right. Thank you. Representative Van Workum.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Clinton, for being here and testifying. I wanted to ask, maybe you gave, oh, the slide is right here. It's kind of, it's not quite the blind auditions of The Voice, but you kind of give us a little sense of this. But it kind of goes to my question of, we have a cap here of the 200 million, and the testimony we both hear of was, well, this isn't money that's going out. This isn't money that would normally have gone to the state. So one question is, why the cap? The second is, would we come close to the cap with the projects that are in the pipeline here? But also, maybe you can peel back the curtain a little bit of the MSF on a decision like this. If there is a cap, and you got kind of the blind auditions or non-blind auditions of here, how do you make the determination of who is going to get that dollar compared and who is not going to get that? It's not a simple, this is going to create X amount of jobs, or it's going to be far more classifications here, because you've got Southeast Michigan, you've got, this is an EV, you've got, this is, you said, battery storage. How is that decision-making process going to take place?
Thank you, Mr. Representative. I think there are about 3 questions in there, so let me try to unpack them in order, and maybe reverse order. Beginning with, how do we go about the due diligence process of considering opportunities? Contrary to popular belief, every company that is seeking de-risking financial support from Team Michigan does not receive it. There is a rigorous due diligence process that's conducted internally before we ever, based upon making sure that the company can provide the required information as indicated by statute, that we have a very good sense of where the company is within its particular industry. So it goes through this process. And then MEDC, a pretty rigorous process internally, and Josh can talk about the specifics of it and how it's evolved over time. It goes through this internal process, and then it goes to the MSF board. I want to be clear, the MEDC can only make recommendations. The MSF board is the body that has the authority to approve whether or not the state sends or approves any incentive, whether it's the existing incentives or the contemplated programs. The MSFF, the Michigan Strategic Fund Board, has 2 subcommittees, a Finance and Investment Subcommittee, as well as a Strategy and Policy Subcommittee, that also take a look and does its own due diligence before it ever goes into a public meeting for approval. What I think is important to note, that let's assume that a project is approved. That project is immediately goes through a compliance process. We don't just approve a project and say, hey, thank you very much, and we never see it, the company. Every incentive that at least I've been a part of has milestones that have to be accomplished. And those milestones will be monitored by our compliance team that's staffed by attorneys as well as compliance professionals. If companies fall out of compliance, they have a reasonable cure period. If they are unable to cure during that cure period, then the dollars will be clawed back. And we have clawed back and will continue to claw back. Every agreement that we sign has this clawback provision, which is common sense and responsible. I would say, parenthetically, by the way, not every state has those clawback provisions. The former state in which I was, Louisiana, is contemplating getting rid of not only clawback provisions, but all job requirements for any incentive. We also know that the state of South Carolina is also contemplating that. They are 2 of the U.S. states with which we compete across a number of different sectors. So that's just at a high level on the MSF and the process. Obviously, it's a little bit more in depth than that, and Josh couldn't correct anything I didn't didn't mention. But on the $200 million cap, I leave that to the discretion of the legislatures. I think the most important thing is, and I'm grateful for, is that the legislature is contemplating bringing back the tools. What we can do is provide fact-based advice and counsel to this branch of government as well as the executive branch. And the legislators, the elected officials, you will decide whether there'll be a cap and a particular mechanisms. I will have to defer to the bill sponsors, or maybe Josh can speak to the 200 million, but I really think that that's the domain of the bill sponsors. The most important matter is the fact that we are talking about a common sense tool that will allow us to have greater flexibility to not only, as I think Senator Singh mentioned, a tool in the middle, but also a tool that's flexible and relieves budgetary pressure on our business attraction and community revitalization project line that goes into both business attraction and community revitalization. Josh, do you want to correct or amplify anything I said about the process?
Yeah, just a couple of quick amplifications there. First of all, in terms of the question on the $200 million, completely echo Quentin's comment there about the legislators' role in terms of making that determination on the amount. I will say, too, the other component of that question is that we have a robust pipeline of projects that we're looking at right now, highlighted here with a few of them that will begin to utilize the program if it's put into place, but it would not exhaust the full amount of the program based on the pipeline that we have. So we would continue to have the opportunity to use this tool going forward, and that's where that longer term sunset, another reason where that's important to it. As Mr. Messer talked about the compliance process and the review and due diligence process, just to reiterate that the MEDC recommends these incentive uses to the MSF board, and we look at a evaluation process that is based on what's in the statute and based on guidelines that would be set forth by the MSF board, taking into account things like the total job creation, the impact of that job creation relative to the size of the community and the region that it's located in. We look at the wages for the projects, the economic impact on the state based on third-party economic modeling. All of those also tie into the hiring and training plans that the company has to show that they are not only going to hire these workers, but they're going to train them through Michigan Works agencies and others for sustainable jobs. And so we look at those types of factors and others through a stringent underwriting process to ensure we are doing the deals with the best impact on the state of Michigan.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. I got to move on to the next group of people who want to testify. But I'm sure if there are any more questions, committee members will follow up. Next, we will be having Mr. James Holman from the Mackinac Center. Right,
Hello again. I'm James Homan. I'm the Director of Fiscal Policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy, a think tank based in Midland, Michigan. And if you remember what I said last week about film subsidies, I thought that economic development programs ought to be judged by how well they develop the economy. And so today, instead of recounting my evidence about why I think this program is going to be unsuccessful or recommending an alternative way to compete with other states, I'm simply going to ask for a change in the program. The supporters of the bill clearly believe that this is going to have a meaningful impact on Michigan's job picture. And so I think we should have performance targets for this bill and a requirement that if the state is unable to meet its performance, that it stops awarding new deals to companies. And if we're talking about economic performance, I think it should be measured against Michigan's job performance data. So I recommend the job creation numbers from as published by the Bureau of Labor Statistics in its quarterly census of employment and wages. But regardless,
I think supporters should be clear and transparent about how much employment they want to come from this program, and that performance ought to be clearly witnessed in the state's job trends, and with the improvements in the job trends directly accountable to the recipients of this program. I think that would make this an accountable program. And I don't think it should be a radical idea that economic development programs be required to develop the economy, and so I hope you consider making that change to this package.
All right. Any questions for Mr. Holman? All right. Well, thank you for those suggestions.
Thank you.
Next, we'll have Lindsay Case-Paulsrek from Business Leaders in Michigan. Presentation.
Thank you. Good morning. Thank you so much for giving me a few minutes today, Chair Hoskins and members of the committee. And before I jump in, I also want to say thank you for your leadership on the bills referenced earlier that we saw pass the House this fall with overwhelming bipartisan support, and that is R&D and REN zones, and we're still watching those and advocating very intensely in the Senate to see them all the way to the governor's desk. But thank you for your support on those as well. I've been here before this committee sharing the broad principles around a report that Business Leaders for Michigan released earlier in the year. It would be last year now, we're in 2024. And I'm not gonna go over all that today, but I am gonna zoom in a little bit on this, what a smart, consistent approach to incentives is, and talk about the bill that's in front of us. The report cites the headwinds that Michigan is still up against and continues to be in our way of becoming a top 10 state. Our income has not kept pace. We've underperformed in growing these knowledge economy jobs that were cited earlier. And a phenomenon we call the Michigan 180, which is this idea that non-political strategies like economic development and perhaps education tend to be aborted and pivoted to in another direction when we change parties, when we change governors, et cetera. And the other states really have a much more prolonged, sustained approach to strategies around economic development. You've seen this before here. Our incomes have not kept pace. We're down about $10,000 on average for the average wage. And these business professional services jobs, the knowledge economy jobs that are being referenced, we've stayed flat since 2000, and the country has seen a spike in 35%. So we're not getting our share of those types of higher paying jobs. Sorry, this chair is bothering me. But the more concerning trend is likely the future, which is this is where the share of job growth is going to come from. So the next curve is likely going to be as important or more important than the last one that you saw. And here is a little bit of an illustration around that Michigan 180. These are the different economic development fits and starts over the last 30 years. And you'll see highlighted here in 2017, Good Jobs for Michigan is created, and in 2019 it was sunsetted. So why Good Jobs for Michigan? Why was that important at the time? At a baseline, you can see that for competitiveness' sake, being one of 7 states who doesn't offer a tool to be able to participate in the competitive process of gaining good jobs here in Michigan is not a disadvantage that we'd like to continue to have. But secondarily, It is a tool that drives at higher wage jobs for a variety of reasons, some mentioned already today and some that were not. Hire is obviously modeled after Good Jobs for Michigan with some changes, but I wanted to share a little bit about some of the performance metrics from Good Jobs for Michigan. In the 2 years it was instated, there was $6 billion in private investment, over 11,000 jobs were committed. The average wage was $31.50, which is 40% above the Michigan median. And the big one here is that there was $1.5 billion in new net revenue for the state. This was a growth tool for the state. So for every dollar that was captured by an employer in the form of this incentive, $5.40 was returned to Michigan taxpayers or returned to the general fund overall as net revenue. So Hire, same tool, but some new enhancements. These sponsors talked about this earlier, some of the changes here. But this version of Good Jobs for Michigan, Hire, will allow for some smaller and mid-sized companies to be able to realize this benefit, but also incremental growth of high-wage jobs in Michigan. So if you're doing, a large company's doing 30 or 40 jobs at a time, this is a tool that other states they would be able to utilize, and now in Michigan would be on the, available to them. You can see the changes to the wages, the floor, 125% in the House of median, 150% for those smaller companies. And the cap mirrors what was in Good Jobs for Michigan. I will say $200 million, again, not really a true cap. It's really about total awards. How many promises can be outstanding from the state at any given time related to this type of deal? And I think it's important to think about the fact that as we may anticipate a future economic downturn, that this might not be the cap that we would want to go lower on when we don't actually have to appropriate anything from general fund and we see net new revenue. This might be the cap that we would want to consider keeping at a robust amount. And the sunset after 8 years. Again, something to transcend administrations, to offset this Michigan 180 impulse that we seem to have in the state to change directions all the time. Representative Farhat alluded to this earlier, but as you can see, from a competitiveness perspective, we could frankly probably go without some of the requirements that Representative Van Workum was bringing up earlier around number of jobs, et cetera, just because what our neighbors do are far lower requirements. 10 new jobs in Ohio, 10 new jobs required in Minnesota. In Indiana, it's just one, and the MEDC, their equivalent, has full discretion. Illinois, it's 50. The wage requirements are either non-existent or they are much less robust than what's in this bill. But I will say, from the knowledge economy driving and quality control perspective, we understand the goal of this, which is to actually not just bring more jobs, but to bring more high-quality jobs. So the program, in summary, it's smart, it grows jobs with high median income. It doesn't favor certain size projects or certain industries. It is based on foregone revenue, which is, again, revenue that we wouldn't otherwise see if we didn't have the tool. Net long-term revenue growth for the state. And it is performance-based. No job, no incentive. The requirements are in the law in terms of the quality. And there's the transparency and accountability that existed before, which, to Mr. Messer's point, is actually, again, more robust than our competitors when you look at the side-by-side that we provided earlier that was referenced. Very quickly, one of the first awards of Good Jobs for Michigan was a company called KLA, Silicon Valley. Turns out they did a survey, not everyone was interested in paying $3,000 a month to live in a 2-bedroom apartment in traffic, and they were going to move. It was, we were in a competitive environment with over 350 other sites. There was 500 jobs that were promised when this agreement was made. They've produced over 600. The average wage has been $112,000. And you can see that this is almost 2.5 times the median wage for this reason. So this is a powerful demonstration of what this tool can do to be able to compete for jobs like this that, again, are not steel in the ground, capital intensive, but rather a headquarters move or filling up, leasing a building and getting to work at growing the economy here. And lastly, I'll just share this. We talk to voters often about how they feel about these types of programs and generally about strategic approaches to bringing jobs to Michigan. 80% of Michigan voters said that we should either match or surpass the type of incentives that our neighbor states and our competitive states offer. Again, 45% said we should do better. We should be more aggressive to compete for these jobs, and 34% said we need to do at least as well as Indiana and Ohio to be able to attract these new jobs in terms of offering competitive incentives. So I am done with my slides and can take questions if there are any.
All right, any questions for Lindsay? Oh, all right. All right, thank you so much for your testimony.
Thank you.
All right, looks like the last person we have to testify is Mr. Mike Johnston from the Michigan Manufacturers Association.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be very brief. A lot of information has been transmitted today, and I'm just here to say MMA has been a strong supporter of economic development incentives for a long time, and the reason is clear. The not doing economic development incentives has a very clear result. And we saw when Tennessee and Kentucky outcompete us for a large manufacturing investment, $11 billion, 11,000 jobs went somewhere else that would have been captured here in Michigan. We just think it's important to stay in the game, to compete with other states. Other states want what we have, and we have to play the game. Representative Tisdale, I hear you on business climate. You're exactly right, but if you don't do economic development incentives in addition to doing all the business climate things, Michigan will lose. So, Chairman Hoskins, thank you very much for your leadership on this. Representative Martis and Filler, appreciate their leadership. We're here to support your efforts, and thank you for the opportunity to testify today.
All right, thank you. All right, so I don't see any questions. All right, I'm going to read in some cards. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill, Mike Spence from the Southeast Michigan Council of Governments. Not wishing to speak in support of the bill. Amy, I can't see your last name, I'm sorry, from the Metropolitan Affairs Coalition. Not wishing to speak in support of the bills, Jess Stoutenberg from Dow. In support of the bills, Brian Show from the Detroit Regional Chamber. In support of the bills, Ryan Hunt from Michigan Works Association. And in opposition of the bills, Sarah Anderson from the Michigan Freedom Fund. All right. See, we didn't have any absent members. Representative Neely moves to approve the minutes from the February 6th meeting. Without objection, so ordered. There being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.